we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
What's up, everybody? This is Whiskey in the Six. I'm Rob, doing my Whiskey for Rookies video. Now, let's start with what whiskey is. Whiskey is distillate made from grain, water, and yeast. That's it. Any type of grain, so it could be corn, rye, barley, malted barley, which is germinated barley, and even wheat you'll see in a lot of whiskey as well. Common misconceptions for whiskey. There are people that'll say, I'm a bourbon guy, I don't really like whiskey, or I don't like whiskey, I'm a Scotch guy. Those are actually both whiskeys. Bourbon, Scotch. They're just made differently with different ingredients usually, but they're all whiskey. What type of glass should you use to drink whiskey? I use the Glencairn glass. You can get knockoffs for this at a really cheap price. Any type of tulip glass will work. You can use a tumbler as well. The reason why I don't use a tumbler is because nosing whiskey is an important part of my experience. So the tulip shaped glass is designed so that I can nose my whiskey a little bit better. It funnels the smells to the top of the glass and I'm able to pick out different types of smells coming from that whiskey with the Glencairn glass. That doesn't mean you shouldn't drink it with a tumbler. It doesn't mean you can't use a plastic glass. Drink it however you like it. This is my recommendation to you. I think you'll like it. It's great and it's become one of the industry standards. So, the Glencairn glass. Whiskey's made all over the world. These are the ones that are available where I'm from here in Ontario. Now, I have some Canadian, I have some American, I have some Irish, some Scotch, and some Asian. All those places are making excellent whiskeys. There are other places making excellent whiskeys as well, such as Australia, Germany, Italy. Lots of places around the world are making excellent whiskey. This is what's available to me. So I'm going to start with the Canadian whiskey on my left over here. 100% rye grain. This is the Lot 40. It's bottled at 43%, relatively inexpensive, and you'll get a great experience and a great entry into what rye whiskey will taste like by tasting this one. Wiser's makes this one, and it also makes a whole bunch under its own umbrella, which is JP Wiser's. Alright, you'll find a 12, you'll find a 15, an 18, and then some special editions like this 22-year-old and 23-year-old. I recommend you start with the 12-year-old. They have predominantly corn in their blends. Excellent stuff, very approachable. I think you'll like it. Canada is also doing some really cool single malts. Here's an artisan whiskey made by Shelter Point. This is a single malt. Again, malted barley or germinated barley is used to make this. Really good stuff. 46%. I highly recommend Shelter Point. Moving on to American whiskeys. Now this is bourbon. Bourbon has to be 51% corn. It has to be aged in a new oak barrel. It cannot be a used barrel like all the other whiskeys on this table are able to use. Bourbon has to be new oak. Alright? 51% corn. Two other ingredients usually make up majority of the rest of the bourbon, which is either rye or wheat, and then a small portion of barley. Now, you rarely see a bourbon with wheat and rye in it. I'm not sure why that is. They just don't tend to do it. It's one or the other. But again, it has to be majority corn grain. Some great bourbons to start with would be Four Roses Small Batch, would be Buffalo Trace Straight Bourbon, and Wild Turkey 101. Those are all excellent. This one's a lot harder to come by, but it's a wheat example. Weller 107, great stuff, just not that easy to come by. There are other types of Weller and also Maker's Mark if you want to experience a wheated bourbon. Over here, my Irish category. A great entry-level whiskey, although a little bit expensive in these parts, is the Redbreast 12-year-old. It's 40%. Great example of what Irish whiskey can be. This one behind it is the Yellow Spot 12-year-old, also excellent as well. A little higher on the ABV, that's alcohol by volume, 46%, but also very good. Irish whiskey is expensive in Ontario for some reason, so I don't have a lot of options under this category, but start with the Redbreast. I think you'll really enjoy it. Now, there are a ton of Scotch whiskeys. Scotch is probably the most popular globally in the world, being chased down very quickly by bourbon, but yet still the most popular is Scotch. Now, Scotch varies from totally unpeated, which means the barley hasn't been dried by smoking peat moss. The opposite end of the spectrum is the heavily peated ones like this Ardbeg 10-year-old. Okay, and what they do is they, like I said, smoke peat moss to dry the barley. All right, the barley lays in a basket above. A non-peated great entry-level expression for Scotch is the 46% Glenallachie 12-year-old. I love this stuff. I've never met someone that didn't like this. Other options in this category would be Glenlivet 12-year-old, Glenfiddich 12-year-old, Macallan. You can get the Gold, which is as entry-level as you can get for Macallan. Although I would recommend spending a little bit more if you're going to do Macallan and get the 12-year-old sherry cask. That's a great expression of what sherry-aged whiskeys can taste like. If I had a whiskey in between to build your peat tolerance, also known as your smoke tolerance, peat is often mistaken for smoke. It is smoky, it does taste smoky, but peat moss is what gives it that flavor. I would say go with a Highland Park 12-year-old, great in between and building your tolerance for peated whiskeys. Over here, a little bit more peated than the Highland Park 12-year-old would be the Lejeune 10-year-old. Really, really great expression. 46%, 46.3 to be exact. Really nice. Not an Islay whiskey. Islay has a cult following. They are the far south in Scotland, and whiskeys that come out of there tend to be super peated, like this Ardbeg 10-year-old. All right, when I first tried Ardbeg 10-year-old before I got into peated whiskey, it was a little too much for me. So I highly recommend you start with something unpeated like this Glenallachie. If you want to try a little bit of peat, move to your Highland Park 12-year-old or your Johnny Walker Black. Then you can go to your Lejeune, and lastly your Islay whiskeys, which is this Ardbeg right here. All these are really, really good though. So slowly build up and you will develop a palate for it. Speaking of palate, if you want to know how to develop your palate for whiskey, check out Sipper Social Club's video on developing your palate. I will link to it below. You can check that out, and hopefully that'll help you develop your palate so you're ready for your peated whiskeys. Last in the category of what's available to me is the Asian category. This one happens to be Paul John Indian single malt. This is the bold at 46%. A great entry-level expression for Indian whiskey. Another great example of Indian whiskey is the Amrut Fusion. If you want Japanese whiskey, I highly recommend you start with the Hibiki Harmony, although those are getting a little bit expensive these days. There are other Asian whiskeys like Kavalan. They can be a bit expensive as well, but great experience, and I highly recommend you eventually get toward those kind of whiskeys as well. I wasn't able to bring in all the whiskeys from all the different places in the world that make it, but there are some excellent expressions coming out of Australia and other places across the world. This is a good start. If you can try a bunch from these regions, I think you'll be happy. I think this video should be able to help you. Like I said, this is just my opinion, but it should get you started. Alright guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you really like the video, you can hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Check out my Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can support this channel on Patreon. Check out the Whiskey Rant. Alright, that's my podcast with my buddy Jeremy from Sipper Social Club. And if you're into gin, check out my buddy Monti doing 6 Gin and Rock and Roll.